Akira Kurosawa's Yojimbo and Park Chan-wook's Old Boy are two films that on their heads seem entirely different, but in fact have some very nuanced overlaps in both their themes and characterizations of their protagonists, and also in the way they deal with the concept of revenge. While Old Boy itself is a more straightforward revenge film, Yojimbo is not. While Yojimbo is based more loosely on American spaghetti western films, which featured more action and the intervention of a single powerful protagonist. That is what the Ronin, the protagonist of Yojimbo, embodies, the ultimate protagonist. And while the contexts of the main protagonist's revenge in Old Boy and Yojimbo are vastly different, both films arrive at similar conclusions about not only the futility of revenge, but the way the films punish their respective protagonists in correlation with their sins as well. Not only this, but the way that the stories are set up the revenge plots for each respective protagonist in very different contexts. One for entirely selfish reasons, and the other for the liberation of an abused working lower class that is caught in the middle of a crossfire between two warring merchant factions. It's interesting to see how these films not only have commentary on the revenge genre and the themes of revenge, but also commentary on class. Although it is subtle in both films, there is an undertone of class commentary hidden within the themes of revenge and the characterizations of our protagonists. This brings me into my first point, which is about the progression and development of the main protagonists in each film. Both start out as apathetic drunks, finding some place between a dog and a wolf in both of their characterizations. In their mannerisms and their actions, they find a new reason to live, and that reason is to exact their vengeance, to fulfill their vengeful desires. Sanjuro is a traveling Ronin with seemingly no direction, as he lets the fall of a stick decide his path, while Dae-su starts as a drunken salaryman with a wife and a daughter, so he has baggage, he has loyalty. Before being set on their paths of revenge, the protagonists have different loyalties that the audience is made aware of very early on in both of the films. The bodyguard has no loyalty to anyone, except whoever has more coin, while Dae-su has his family to lose before his imprisonment. When regarded by others, the Ronin is first seen as a hungry dog biting at the first opportunity for money, indulging in the needless bloodshed of the town, and constantly twitching his shoulder like a wild wolf, trying to get fleas out of its fur. The Ronin sees both sides of the conflict in the village as detestable, deciding the town would be better off with both sides killing each other off. The Ronin takes justice into his own hands, becoming the judge, jury, and executioner for the two warring merchant factions. Whether the audience thinks the Ronin's judgment is correct or not, it is undeniable this is a massive ethical decision that is put into the Ronin's hands mainly because of his status as a Ronin. Even though Ronin are disgraced samurai, they technically don't serve a master, they still hold a higher place in this time period in the social hierarchy than most of the people in this village, who are seemingly very poor, and the only people who have any sort of influence are the merchants and the mayor, also the inspector from Edo who comes to visit. These people have status, which changes the context in which they act, because in contrast with Dae-su, who is just another salaryman in a dark capitalist, neo-noir South Korea. It's a neo-noir film. Similar to the Ronin's ability to affect the village, the small village I should say, through his relative influence, and the opposing merchant class factions who can hire bandit muscle, Lee Woo-jin exacts his own revenge on Dae-su through his own capitalist influence, which enables Dae-su's path to his own manipulated, convoluted revenge. While the Ronin is welcomed and accepted by the villagers, however begrudgingly at first, Dae-su is largely an outsider and isn't considered by anyone in the public sphere. He's mostly just acting by himself. The only person who really considers him is Mi-do, and she's hypnotized to do so. And I mean, this is strange, especially considering that Dae-su's been wanted for the murder of his wife for almost 15 years. Like, you'd think people would recognize his face, even if he looks a little rough. And shortly after the iconic hallway scene, Dae-su is visibly injured and soaked in blood, but no one on the street stops to help him, or so much as shows genuine concern for a visibly bloody person until he collapses. However, even this is an illusion, as it was Lee Woo-jin who catches Dae-su to get the hammer monster back on track. While the Ronin is comfortably accepted, although this can be argued to be Japanese hospitality, it can also be a demonstration of the kind of influence someone regarded at the top of the social hierarchy relative to everyone else in the village could have on a conflict that was common in this time period, in the time period Yojimbo is set in. Both men are seemingly glorified in their violence, but also show concerning psychological problems, like Dae-su's psychological fracturing after his imprisonment, or the Ronin's excited expression when he fights with a sword. Both men take a delight in fighting and violence. It seems like their modus operandi for getting what they want. When Sanjuro wants to free Nue and her husband, his solution is to distract the gullible Inokichi and kill all 6 guards in the house by himself. Similarly, Dae-su uses his hammer and self-taught boxing skills to get through any obstacle that comes at him, which is usually a group of people who have very punchable, hammerable faces. These methods only get the protagonist so far, as Sanjuro is left bloody and beaten after Inosuke discovers the Ronin help Nue escape, and Dae-su is, well, each story ends up punishing their protagonist for taking part in the cycle of vengeance at different parts of the film. Yojimbo's punishment for its protagonist happening when the bodyguard is captured by the mercenaries, and he's thrown around by the big guard. I wish I had footage, but I couldn't get a recording of the full movie. And Old Boy's punishment for Dae-su comes at the very end in Lee Woo-jin's apartment, when Dae-su is told the truth about Mido being his daughter after they slept together. It's not really comparable, you know, but I think that's kind of the point. His final punishment, after he degrades himself to the point of licking Lee Woo-jin's shoes and cutting off his own tongue, is being forced to listen to an audio recording of him and Mido having sex. Both characters face dire consequences upon exacting their personal vengeance. Dae-su facing an ironic twist of his own dental torture after pulling 15 teeth from one of the men who imprisoned him, and Sanjuro the Ronin receives a pretty bad beating from the large mercenary in his prison cell in the brewery. Both of these instances of punishment for the protagonist show the possible consequences of not only taking part in excessive violence, but for exacting a fruitless revenge that will only taste more bitter with each bite. Even though the Ronin is much more justified in his vengeance and his violent actions, because he is specifically acting on a sense of justice rather than the entirely selfish vengeance Dae-su acts out, Sanjuro's actions still end up making the conflict in the village worse and exacerbates the violence to the point it ends up involving the innocent barkeeper. In contrast, Dae-su's revenge is entirely motivated and only fulfilled at the expense of others, who are arguably less innocent than the villagers in Yojimbo, but are still just caught in the crossfire between Dae-su's and Lee Woo-jin's respective acts of vengeance. It should go without saying Old Boy is a much more traditional, if you could call Old Boy traditional at all. With the concept of revenge being at the center of Park Chan-wook's Vengeance trilogy, but even Yojimbo has something profound to ask about the fulfillment of vengeance. Can revenge lead to healing? The justifications of the protagonist's revenge are completely different, making not only their characterizations different with how we interpret that revenge as an audience, but the meanings one could interpret from the film's respective endings are vastly different. When it comes down to it, Yojimbo is a Jidaigeki film, a film recreating Japan's feudal, often violent past, with a commentary on class, specifically the frustration of the lower class watching the violent squabbling of the rising merchant class during the Edo period, that epitomizes the frustration through the vengeance of the Ronin. The Ronin is an unrelated third party that represents someone with similar social status as the merchants, acting out retribution for an abused lower class, while constantly exploiting the corrupt merchant class for more and more currency. Conversely, Old Boy is the second film in a trilogy about revenge, aptly named the Vengeance Trilogy, that are all narratively disconnected from each other, but still share thematic similarities. Old Boy focuses on someone who starts as a seemingly simple salaryman that has clearly been beaten down by capitalist society, a trend of characterization that can be seen in Western films glorifying transgressive violence and toxic masculinity. Once Dae-su is mysteriously captured, the reasoning for his revenge becomes clear, as the audience is informed of his 15-year imprisonment. It is in this time Dae-su learns of his wife's murder, contemplates his wrongdoings, writes a list of the names of people he has wronged in an attempt to figure out who imprisoned him, attempts suicide multiple times only to be saved by his captors, shadowboxes with the wall until he breaks his wrist and bloodies his knuckles, and forms these really tough calluses on his knuckles. Like, God, getting punched by that would be like taking a hit from Roberto Duran. And eventually he plans his escape attempt using a stolen metal chopstick. However, his escape attempt is foiled when he is inexplicably released, with nothing but a wallet and a cell phone. Confused and in a rage, Dae-su plans his revenge, but little does he know this was only the start of Lee Woo-jin's plot against Dae-su. The cycle of vengeance is prevalent from the start of the film. The protagonist wronged someone, they got revenge on him, and now he wants revenge on them. It is a cycle that will continue to spiral as each person tries to come out on top. Ultimately, no matter the justification for Dae-su's actions, acting purely on vengeance turns him into a machine, a monster, and finally, a dog. His vengeance leads him to nowhere but rock bottom. Even in Dae-su's final attempt at forgetting his relation to Mido, to try and live in ignorance and bliss, he fails, because he can't simply move on from the emptiness that fulfilling selfish revenge leaves a person with. In his attempts to become a monstrous wolf, Dae-su decides, upon learning the truth, that he can't bear it, and he would rather be an ignorant dog. Conversely, the Ronin, however badly beaten, gets to move on from his experience in the village. While Sanjuro is punished at first for causing more problems for the village, it is only when he starts acting on his ethics that the Ronin is truly justified in his vengeance, which is not entirely self-motivated, but out of goodwill, out of the kindness of the Ronin's heart. Unlike Dae-su, Sanjuro befriends the only person who took him in, the old barkeep, which I think is a very significant thematic moment. It is the compromise between classes, the compromise between the old man who is fed up and irritated by the constant hammering of the coffin maker. The old barkeep represents the frustrated working class, as he is stuck between the two sides, forced to listen to their squabbles and watch from the outside through paneled windows. In this way, the audience is brought to the perspective of not only the samurai, but the old man and the lower class in the village. It's in the differences between these two movies that there are so many ways to find similarities. In commentary on vengeance, class, personal growth, how you affect the people around you. But when ultimately looking at the endings of these movies, I think it's too simple to say that all they have to say about revenge is that it's futile. That's an oversimplification of it. That doesn't get nearly into the nuance of what these two pieces are trying to say, but they each have a very extreme depiction of justified and unjustified vengeance. Yojimbo's Ronin teaches us to use our influence and our power to help those who are suffering, to help those who can't exact vengeance for themselves. Righteous vengeance against people who are simply taking, who are hurting those around them that can't defend themselves. While Old Boy teaches us that vengeance pursued for simply selfish reasons result in selfish consequences, and consequences that affect more than just the selfish person. It teaches us that in the pursuit of the truth, you might not like what you find. You might not be able to live with the truth. You might not be able to live knowing that your vengeance is fulfilled and that purpose in your life is gone. Because a person fueled by selfish vengeance is selfish because they're pursuing that vengeance. And once it's fulfilled, they have nothing.